The coffee hit his chest like a declaration of war. In the silence that followed, Mariam realized she had just signed her own death warrant. 7 hours into her double shift at Elon Cafe, her feet throbbed with a bone-deep ache that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Her lower back screamed every time she bent to grab a cup, and her eyes burned from the combination of steam, lack of sleep, and the fluorescent lights that made everything look slightly unreal. She balanced 3 cappuccinos on a tray, 2 lattes, and an Americano that was already cooling too fast. Table 8 was getting impatient. She could see the woman checking her watch every 30 seconds, could feel the weight of her disapproval from across the dining room. Behind her, a man was shouting something about needing more oat milk, and the ticket printer was spitting out orders faster than she could process them. The cafe was packed wall-to-wall with the downtown lunch crowd, every table filled with people in expensive suits having expensive conversations about things that probably cost more than her yearly salary. Mariam took a breath, steadied the tray, and started moving through the maze of tables and chairs that seemed to shift every time she blinked. She'd done this 1,000 times. 10,000 times. She could navigate this room blind if she had to, could read the flow of traffic like a map written in her muscle memory. Past the couple arguing quietly in the corner, around the businessman who always sat with his chair too far out, between the 2 women who met here every Tuesday to discuss their book club. She was 3 steps from table 8 when it happened. A chair scraped back without warning, catching the edge of her peripheral vision too late. She tried to pivot, tried to adjust her grip on the tray, but her exhausted reflexes betrayed her. The tray tilted. Time seemed to slow down in that horrible way it does when you know disaster is coming and you're powerless to stop it. The Americano, still scalding hot, slid forward with terrible inevitability. And then it was falling, arcing through the air in a perfect trajectory toward the man sitting alone at table 12. She had a split second to register details. The pristine black suit that probably cost more than her car, the perfectly styled dark hair, the sharp angles of his face that would have been beautiful if they weren't about to be covered in coffee. The cup hit his chest dead center, splashing upward and outward in a corona of dark liquid that spread across the expensive fabric like ink in water. The entire cafe went silent. Every conversation stopped mid-word. Every fork froze halfway to every mouth. Even the espresso machine seemed to quiet, as if the universe itself was holding its breath to see what would happen next. Mariam stood frozen, the empty tray clutched in her hands like a shield, staring at the disaster she'd created. The coffee was still dripping down his suit, soaking into the white shirt underneath, spreading in a stain that looked almost deliberate in its symmetry. She waited for him to explode. Waited for the screaming, the threats, the demand to see her manager. Waited for the familiar shame of public humiliation, the hot flush of failure that she'd felt too many times in her 26 years. But the man didn't move. He sat perfectly still, looking down at the coffee spreading across his chest with an expression she couldn't read. His face was carved from stone, beautiful and terrible in its complete absence of reaction. Around them she could hear the whispers starting. Could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her back, watching, judging, waiting. "I am so sorry." The words tumbled out of her mouth in a rush, desperate and inadequate. "I am so sorry. The chair. Someone moved and I didn't see, and I'll pay for the cleaning, I'll pay for the suit, She stopped, realizing she had no idea how she would pay for a suit like that. It probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. But she'd figure it out. He had to figure it out. The man looked up at her then, and Mariam felt her breath catch in her throat. His eyes were dark, almost black in the cafe's lighting, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to step back. But she held her ground, meeting his gaze even as her hands trembled around the tray. She'd been raised better than to look away, even when every instinct screamed at her to run. "It was an accident," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. "I take full responsibility. Whatever it costs, I'll make it right." She wasn't begging. She was stating facts, offering solutions, handling the crisis the way she'd been taught. Dignity, her grandmother used to say, was something you carried with you even when you had nothing else. The man tilted his head slightly, studying her with those unreadable eyes. Behind him, she noticed for the first time that there were other men at nearby tables. 3 of them, all in dark suits, all watching the scene with attention that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. They'd been so quiet she hadn't even registered their presence, but now she could feel their focus like a physical weight. One of them had half risen from his chair, his hand moving toward something inside his jacket. The man in the coffee-stained suit raised one hand, a small gesture that froze everyone in place. "Your name," he said, and his voice was quiet, accented, dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with volume. It was the kind of voice that didn't need to be raised because it expected to be obeyed. "Mariam," she answered before she could think better of it. "Mariam Clarke." "Mariam," he repeated like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. He stood slowly and she realized he was taller than she'd thought, his presence seeming to fill the space around him. Coffee dripped from his suit onto the polished floor, but he didn't seem to notice or care. "I will remember that." He reached into his pocket and Mariam's heart stuttered, but all he produced was a black leather wallet. He pulled out several bills, she couldn't see how many, but they looked crisp and new, and placed them on the table. Then he looked at her one more time, his expression still unreadable, and walked toward the exit. The three men at the other tables immediately fell in behind him, moving with the kind of synchronized precision that spoke of years of practice. The door closed behind them and the cafe erupted. Everyone started talking at once, voices overlapping in a chaos of speculation and gossip. Mariam stood in the center of it all, still clutching the empty tray, her mind trying to process what had just happened. She just humiliated a man who clearly had money and power, had ruined what was probably a several $1,000 suit, and he just walked away. Walked away after giving his name and leaving money on the table like nothing had happened. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. "Mariam." Marcus's voice cut through the noise, sharp with panic. "What the hell was that? Do you know who that was?" "A customer?" she offered weakly, finally lowering the tray. Her arms felt like lead. "A customer? That was—" Marcus stopped, glanced around at all the listening ears and lowered his voice. Just be careful. Really careful." He walked away before she could ask what he meant, leaving her standing there with a growing sense that she'd just stepped into something much bigger than a simple coffee accident. Mariam forced herself to move, to clean up the spill, to finish her shift with mechanical efficiency. But her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and every time she closed her eyes she saw his face. The calm in his expression. The way he'd said her name like he was committing it to memory. The gesture that had frozen three grown men in place. That night, lying in her tiny studio apartment with her feet elevated and an ice pack on her lower back, Mariam tried to convince herself it was over. It was just an accident. A weird, unsettling accident, but nothing more. The man would get his suit cleaned or buy a new one and forget the whole thing ever happened. She would go back to work tomorrow and life would return to normal. Except she couldn't shake the feeling that nothing was going to be normal ever again. The way he'd looked at her, the way he'd said he would remember her name, it felt like a promise and a threat wrapped into one. She told herself she was being paranoid. Told herself that exhaustion and stress were making her imagine danger where there was none. But deep down, in the part of her that had learned to trust her instincts growing up in a city that didn't forgive mistakes, Mariam knew the truth. This wasn't the end of anything. It was barely the beginning. 5 days passed before Mariam saw him again. 5 days of jumping every time the cafe door opened. 5 days of scanning every dark suit in the morning rush. 5 days of telling herself she was being ridiculous while simultaneously being unable to stop looking over her shoulder. Marcus had been weird around her since the incident, alternating between concerned glances and careful distance, like she was somehow contagious. The other servers whispered when they thought she couldn't hear, but nobody would tell her anything concrete. She tried Googling Korean businessman downtown, and variations thereof, but the internet had offered nothing useful. Just articles about tech startups and real estate developers, none of whom looked like the man whose suit she'd ruined. She'd almost convinced herself she'd imagined the whole thing. The intensity in his eyes, the synchronized movement of those other men, the way the entire cafe had gone silent like someone had pressed pause on reality. Almost. It was a Thursday morning, quieter than usual when he walked back through the door. Mariam was refilling the pastry case, her back to the entrance, when she felt the shift in atmosphere. That same collective held breath, that same subtle tension that made the air feel heavier. She turned slowly, already knowing what she would see. He was dressed differently today. Charcoal gray suit instead of black, but equally expensive, equally perfect. His dark hair was styled with careful precision, and he moved through the cafe like he owned it. which, given the way everyone else seemed to shrink back slightly, he might as well have. But he wasn't looking at the room. He was looking directly at her. Their eyes met across the space and Mariam felt her stomach drop. He walked to a table, not the same one from before but a different spot near the window, and sat down with economical grace. Then he did something that made her blood run cold. He gestured to one of the servers, spoke briefly and pointed directly at Mariam. "He's asking for you," Jessica whispered, appearing at her elbow with wide eyes. "By name. What did you do?" "I spilled coffee on him," Mariam said faintly. "Last week. And he came back. Girl, that man doesn't come back anywhere. He sends people to come back for him." Jessica looked genuinely frightened. "Be careful. Please." Mariam forced her feet to move, forced herself to walk across that floor with her head up and her hands steady. She'd faced down angry patients' families, had talked down drunk men twice her size, had survived situations that would have broken other people. She could handle one man in a suit, no matter how unsettling his presence felt. "Good morning," she said when she reached his table, and was proud of how level her voice came out. "What can I get you?" "Americano," he said, and she recognized that voice immediately. Quiet, accented, containing depths she couldn't read. "Black. Hot." He paused and something that might have been amusement flickered in his dark eyes. "I trust you can manage that without incident?" Was that a joke? Mariam couldn't tell. His expression remained unreadable, but there was something in the way he'd said it that suggested he wasn't actually angry. "I'll do my best," she replied, matching his tone. "Though I can't make any promises about other customers and their chairs." This time she was certain she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. "Then I will sit very still," he said. "And you will be careful." "A fair arrangement, yes." "Very fair," Mariam agreed and retreated to make his coffee with hands that trembled only slightly. When she brought it back, she set it down with exaggerated care, making sure it was centered on the saucer, making sure her hands were steady. He watched her with that same intense focus, like he was studying something fascinating and slightly unexpected. "Perfect," he said. "No disasters today." "The day is young," Mariam heard herself say and immediately wondered if she'd lost her mind. You didn't joke with men like this. Men who walked around with other men in formation behind them. Men who made entire rooms go quiet. But he smiled. Actually smiled. A brief flash of something genuine that transformed his face from merely handsome to absolutely devastating. "Indeed it is," he agreed. "What time do you finish?" The question caught her off guard. What? Your shift. When does it end?" He took a sip of his coffee, watching her over the rim of the cup. "I am curious." "Why?" Mariam asked bluntly, too surprised to be tactful. "Because I would like to speak with you," he said simply. "Somewhere less public." "I don't even know your name," she protested, even as part of her brain screamed at her to just say no and walk away. "Ha-joon," he said. "You may call me Ha-joon." He set down his coffee cup and looked at her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "And you are Mariam Clarke, 26 years old, working 2 jobs to pay for night classes at City College. You take the bus home because your car broke down 3 months ago and you cannot afford to fix it. You send money to your grandmother in Atlanta every month, even when it means you eat ramen for dinner." Mariam felt the blood drain from her face. "How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know things," Ha-joon said calmly. "Especially about people who interest me." "I ruined your suit," Mariam said slowly. "That's not interesting, that's just clumsy." "You did not beg," he corrected. "You did not grovel or make excuses. You apologized, took responsibility and met my eyes while doing so. Most people cannot manage that. Most people see me and immediately start calculating how to save themselves." He tilted his head slightly. "You saw a customer. A person. That is unusual." "Should I have seen something else?" Mariam asked carefully. "Should I know who you are?" "Many people in this city would say yes," Ha-joon replied. "But I find I prefer that you do not. It is refreshing to be looked at without fear." "I didn't say I wasn't afraid," Mariam said honestly. "I just said I didn't know who you were. Those are different things." Ha-joon studied her for a long moment, then pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. It was simple, expensive paper with just a phone number embossed in black. No name, no title, nothing to identify what it was for. 3 o'clock, he said. I will send a car. If you choose to get in, we will talk. If you choose not to, I will not bother you again. The decision is entirely yours. And if I don't trust you? Mariam asked, even as her fingers moved almost involuntarily to pick up the card. Then you are smarter than you appear, Ha-joon said and stood. But I think you are also curious. And I think curiosity will win. He placed money on the table, far more than the coffee cost, and walked toward the door. This time there were no other men with him, at least none that were visible. He paused at the threshold and looked back at her. 3 o'clock, Mariam Clarke. I will be waiting. The door closed behind him and Mariam looked down at the card in her hand. Just a phone number. Just a choice. He should throw it away. Should pretend this never happened. Should go back to her normal life and forget about dark-eyed men in expensive suits who somehow knew everything about her life. But she didn't throw it away. She slipped it into her pocket and finished her shift in a daze, Jessica's warnings echoing in her head alongside Ha-joon's quiet confidence. At 2:45 she stood outside the cafe in her street clothes, phone in one hand, the business card in the other. A black town car pulled up exactly at 3 o'clock. The back window rolled down and she could see Ha-joon sitting in the back seat, watching her with patient expectation. This was insane. This was dangerous. This was possibly the worst decision she would ever make. Mariam took a breath, thought about her grandmother's voice telling her to trust her instincts, thought about the way Ha-joon had smiled when she joked with him, thought about how tired she was of being afraid of her own life. She opened the door and got in. The interior was luxury itself. Leather seats, tinted windows, absolute silence except for the quiet hum of the engine. Ha-joon sat across from her, looking perfectly at ease, while she perched on the edge of her seat like she might need to bolt at any moment. You came, he said, and she could hear something like satisfaction in his voice. I'm probably going to regret this, Mariam replied. But yes, I came. Now tell me what you want. To understand you, Ha-joon said simply. You work yourself to exhaustion for wages that barely cover your bills. You send money you cannot spare to family who needs it. You take night classes even though you can barely stay awake. Why? Because I want more, Mariam said. Because I'm not going to spend my whole life serving coffee to people who don't see me. Because my grandmother raised me to be better than my circumstances. She met his eyes squarely. Why do you care? Because I recognize something in you, Ha-joon said. You carry dignity like armor. You refuse to bow even when it might save you. In my world, that kind of strength is rare. In my world, most people learn to bend or they break. And what world is that exactly? Mariam asked. The car was moving through the city, she noticed, though she had no idea where they were going. Who are you really, Ha-joon? He was quiet for a long moment and she could see him weighing how much to tell her. I am someone who operates in spaces between what is legal and what is necessary, he said finally. Someone who provides services that others cannot or will not. Someone who has built an empire on fear and control. He looked at her steadily. Someone you should probably run from. Are you warning me off? Mariam asked. Or testing me? Both, Ha-joon admitted. I am giving you the truth and watching to see what you do with it. The truth, Mariam repeated. You mean you're a criminal? You're an organized crime. That's what you're saying. That is one way to phrase it, yes. Mariam looked out the window at the city passing by. She should tell him to stop the car. Should get out and never look back. Should protect herself from whatever this was turning into. And the men with you at the cafe? She asked instead. My associates. My protection. In my position one cannot be too careful. Are you a dangerous man, Ha-joon? Very, he said without hesitation. To people who threaten me or what is mine. But not to you. How can I believe that? You cannot, Ha-joon said. Not with certainty. That is the nature of trust. It requires risk. But I can tell you this. If I wanted to harm you, I would not need to buy you coffee or send cars or have conversations. The fact that we are talking at all should tell you something about my intentions. The car pulled up outside a restaurant Mariam recognized but had never been able to afford. Ha-joon opened his door and looked back at her. Have dinner with me. Ask me questions. Decide for yourself what kind of man I am. And then choose whether to see me again. Mariam looked at the restaurant, at Ha-joon's extended hand, at the impossible choice she was being offered. Every rational part of her brain was screaming danger. But there was something else too. Curiosity, yes, but also a strange sense of recognition. Like Ha-joon had said, she saw in him the same thing he apparently saw in her. Someone who refused to apologize for existing in spaces where they didn't quite belong. She took his hand and stepped out of the car. Would you walk away? Or stay? Say it in the comments section. Dinner became 2 dinners, which became 3. Ha-joon was careful with her, Mariam realized. He never pushed, never demanded more time than she was willing to give. He asked about her classes, her dreams, her grandmother. He listened when she talked about the exhaustion of working 2 jobs, the fear of never escaping the cycle of barely enough. And slowly, carefully, he told her pieces of his own story. He'd come to America at 22, he said, sent by his family to expand their business interests. He didn't specify what those interests were, not exactly, but Mariam could read between the lines. Protection services. Import-export with flexible interpretations of customs law. Money that moved through channels the government couldn't or wouldn't track. He spoke about it matter-of-factly, without shame or pride, like these were simply the facts of his existence. Do you ever regret it? Mariam asked one evening, 3 weeks after that first dinner. They were in his apartment this time. A penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of a building in the financial district. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city spread out below them like a constellation of earthbound stars. The life you chose? I did not choose it, Ha-joon said. He was standing by the window, silhouetted against the lights, and Mariam could see the tension in his shoulders. I was born into it. My grandfather built our family's reputation. My father maintained it. I inherited it along with expectations I did not ask for. You could walk away, Mariam said. Couldn't you? Ha-joon turned to look at her, and in the low light of the apartment, his face was all shadows and sharp angles. People in my position do not retire gracefully. They die or they are killed. Walking away is not an option when everyone you have ever wronged knows exactly where to find you. That's a terrible way to live. It is the only way I know, Ha-joon said simply. Until recently. Mariam understood what he meant. She felt it too, this thing growing between them that neither of them had named. It was dangerous and foolish and probably doomed, but it was also real. She'd stopped pretending to herself that she was just curious about him, stopped lying about why she kept saying yes when he called. She was falling for him, or maybe she'd been falling since the moment he'd looked at her with coffee dripping down his suit and chosen not to destroy her for the accident. I need to tell you something, Ha-joon said, and the serious tone in his voice made her stomach clench. Something you deserve to know before this goes any further. Okay, Mariam said carefully. What is it? You are being watched. The words were quiet but absolute. Not by me, I would never violate your privacy that way. But by others. People who have noticed that I have been spending time with someone new. People who might see that as a weakness to exploit. Mariam felt cold suddenly despite the warmth of the apartment. What kind of people? The kind who believe that hurting someone close to me is the best way to hurt me, Ha-joon said. The kind who do not share my reluctance to harm innocent people. He crossed the room and sat beside her on the sofa, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. I am telling you this because you need to make a choice. If you want to end this, do it now. Before you become more of a target than you already are. I will ensure your safety, will make certain everyone knows you are not connected to me, and you can return to your life as it was. And if I don't want to end it? Mariam asked, though her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own voice. Then you stay with me, Ha-joon said. I assign protection to you whether you see them or not. You continue your life but with the understanding that you are no longer entirely safe. That being close to me comes with risks I cannot completely eliminate. His hand found hers, fingers threading together. I am asking you to choose danger, Mariam. I know how that sounds. But I am also promising that I will do everything in my power to keep you safe. Why me? Mariam asked. Why risk all this for someone you barely know? Because you make me feel like someone I thought I had killed years ago, Ha-joon said, and there was raw honesty in his voice that made her chest ache. Because when I am with you, I remember what it feels like to want something other than control and fear. Because you are brave and honest and you refuse to let the world break you, and I have not met anyone like that in longer than I can remember. Mariam looked at their joined hands, at the contrast of their skin tones, at the visible evidence of how different their worlds were. She thought about her grandmother's warnings about men who were too smooth, too powerful, too good at making promises. She thought about Jessica's frightened eyes and Marcus's careful distance. She thought about the logical safe choice. Then she thought about the way Ha-joon looked at her like she was something precious. The way he listened when she talked. The way he'd never once made her feel small or stupid or less than. The way he'd given her choice again and again even when it might mean losing her. "I'm not running," she said. "I'm terrified but I'm not running." "You should be terrified," Ha-joon said. "It means you understand the situation." "Then help me understand it better," Mariam said. "Tell me what I'm really dealing with. No more careful explanations. The truth." So he told her. About the territory wars that never made the news, the careful balance of power between different factions, the bribes and threats and violence that kept the whole system running. He told her about his rivals. Other organizations that saw his relative restraint as weakness, that would happily eliminate him if they thought they had an opening. He told her about the men who worked for him, the loyalty built on fear and respect in equal measure. And he told her about the warning he'd received 3 days ago. Someone was asking questions about the woman the boss was seeing. Someone was gathering information, building a file, looking for leverage. It might be nothing, Ha-joon said. Or it might be the beginning of something much worse. "I should have told you sooner," he admitted. "But I did not want to frighten you away. Selfish of me." "Yes," Mariam agreed. "It was. But I understand why you did it." She squeezed his hand. "So what happens now? Do I get bodyguards? Do I have to move? Do I?" The window exploded. That was the only way Mariam's brain could process it. 1 second it was intact, the next it was showering them with glass as something punched through it with a sound like thunder. Ha-joon moved faster than she would have thought possible, pulling her down and covering her body with his as more impacts struck the walls around them. Gunfire. Those were bullets. Someone was shooting at them. "Stay down," Ha-joon commanded, his voice absolutely calm despite the chaos. He had pulled a gun from somewhere, she hadn't even seen him reach for it, and was speaking rapidly in Korean into a phone she didn't know he'd grabbed. More shots, more glass, and then suddenly men were pouring into the apartment through the door. For a horrible second, Mariam thought they were under attack from multiple sides, but then she recognized one of them from the cafe. Ha-joon's men responding to some silent alarm. The shooting stopped. Ha-joon's men surrounded them, checking the apartment with professional efficiency, speaking in rapid Korean. Ha-joon slowly lifted himself off of Mariam, his hands running over her shoulders and arms and face, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "Did anything hit you?" "I don't think so," Mariam said, though she was shaking so hard she couldn't be certain. "Ha-joon, what? They found you faster than I expected," he said grimly. He helped her to her feet, careful of the glass, and she could see his mind working at incredible speed. This was a message. A warning. If they wanted us dead they would have used more shooters. A message saying what? Mariam asked, though she was pretty sure she already knew. "That you are vulnerable," Ha-joon said. "That they know about you and can reach you whenever they choose." His jaw tightened. "That I have given them exactly the weapon they needed." One of his men approached, speaking urgently in Korean. Ha-joon responded sharply, then turned back to Mariam. "We need to leave." "No. They will be watching the building, but my men can get us out safely." "Where are we going?" "Somewhere secure. Somewhere they cannot find you while I deal with this." Ha-joon's hand cupped her face, and his eyes were blazing with an emotion she'd never seen in them before. Rage, yes, but also fear. Actual fear. "I am sorry, Mariam. I am sorry I brought this to your door. But I promise you I will end this. I will make certain you are safe even if it costs me everything I have built." "Don't," Mariam said, her hands gripping his wrist. "Don't promise things you can't guarantee. Just tell me we're going to be okay." "We are going to be okay," Ha-joon said, but she could hear the uncertainty beneath the words. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the feel of her. Then he pulled back and became all business, issuing orders to his men in Korean and English, orchestrating their escape with the same efficiency he'd probably used to build his empire. They left through a service exit, surrounded by men with guns, and Mariam realized with absolute clarity that her life had just changed forever. There was no going back to normal now. No pretending she could return to her shifts at the cafe and her night classes and her small, safe existence. She'd chosen Ha-joon, and that choice had made her a target. As they climbed into an armored SUV and sped away from the building, Mariam looked at Ha-joon's profile in the darkness. He was still holding her hand, his grip almost painfully tight, like he was afraid she might vanish if he let go. He should be terrified. Should be regretting every decision that led to this moment. But all she could think was that she'd never felt more alive. More seen. More essential to someone else's existence. Loving him might cost her everything, and leaving him might cost her more. The safe house was a mansion masquerading as a modest estate in the suburbs, the kind of place that looked unassuming from the street but revealed its true nature once you passed through the gates. Armed security everywhere, visible and invisible. Technology Mariam couldn't even identify, monitoring every approach. Ha-joon explained it all with weary efficiency. This was one of several properties he maintained for exactly this kind of emergency, places his enemies wouldn't immediately think to look. How often does this happen? Mariam asked as they settled into a sitting room that probably cost more to furnish than she'd earn in a decade. Attacks on you, I mean. Less frequently than you might think, Ha-joon said. He'd shed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, and Mariam could see tension in every line of his body. Most conflicts are resolved through negotiation or strategic positioning. Direct violence is messy and draws attention we all prefer to avoid. He poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter, then seemed to think better of it and set it down untouched. But when someone decides diplomacy has failed, they commit completely. Who's doing this? Mariam asked. Do you know? I have suspicions, Ha-joon said darkly. The Kim faction has been pushing for control of shipping routes through the port. They see my reluctance to escalate as weakness. Or perhaps it is the Russians, they have been unusually aggressive lately. Or it could be someone I have not even considered, someone who has been planning this for months and simply waited for the perfect moment. He looked at her and his expression was bleak. In my world, enemies are plentiful and patience is a virtue. His phone rang and he answered it with a curt greeting in Korean. The conversation that followed was terse, sharp, full of words Mariam didn't understand but could read the emotion behind. Anger. Frustration. And underneath it all, that fear again. When he hung up, he stood very still for a moment, his hands still gripping the phone. They hit the cafe, he said finally. Your cafe. While you were not there, thankfully, but the message is clear. They know where you work. Where you live. Where you study. His voice was carefully controlled, but Mariam could hear the rage beneath it. They have been watching you for longer than I realized, and I did not see it. Did not protect you properly. Ha-joon, no, he cut her off. You need to understand what this means. You cannot go back to your apartment. Cannot return to work. Cannot continue your classes, at least not in person. Your entire life has to change because of me. Because I was selfish enough to pursue you despite knowing the risks. I knew the risks too, Mariam said. You told me. I chose to stay. You chose before you understood what staying really meant, Ha-joon said. He crossed the room to her and she could see something breaking in his eyes. Mariam, they will use you to destroy me. Will threaten you, hurt you, kill you if they think it will give them an advantage. And I cannot. His voice cracked slightly. I cannot bear the thought of you suffering because of my world. Then change it, Mariam said. The words came out before she'd fully thought them through, but once they were spoken she realized she meant them. Change your world. Walk away from it. I told you people in my position do not simply walk away. I know what you told me, Mariam interrupted. But I also know you're not like the others. You talk about control and fear, but you're tired of it. I can see it in your eyes every time you talk about your work. You want out. You've wanted out for a long time. Ha-joon stared at her like she'd suggested something impossible. Even if that were true, the practicalities would be difficult. Dangerous. Maybe impossible. Mariam stood and walked to him, placing her hands on his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing beneath her palms. But we're already in danger. We're already facing impossible odds. So why not fight for something better instead of just fighting to maintain something you hate? You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's probably the hardest thing you'd ever do. Mariam looked up at him, this man who'd built an empire on fear and was now afraid for her. But you asked me why I work myself to exhaustion for a better future. Why I refuse to accept my circumstances as permanent. This is why. Because I believe people can change. Can choose differently. Can be more than what the world tells them they have to be. Ha-joon's hands came up to frame her face, and Mariam saw tears in his eyes for the first time. If I try this, if I attempt to dismantle what I have built, there will be war. People who depend on me will be left vulnerable. Rivals will see it as an opportunity to seize power. Blood will be spilled and not all of it will be mine. I know, Mariam said softly. And if you want to find another way to keep me safe, I'll understand. I'll accept whatever you think is best. But don't pretend you're doing this just for me. Don't pretend you haven't wanted a way out for years. He kissed her then, and it felt like surrender and decision all at once. When he pulled back, his eyes had changed. The fear was still there, but it was joined by something else. Determination. Hope. The terrifying courage of someone who'd finally decided to bet everything on a different future. I will need time, he said. Need to negotiate with people who will not want to negotiate. Need to ensure that the structures I leave behind do not collapse into chaos and violence. How much time? Weeks. Maybe months. Ha-joon's thumb stroked her cheek. And during that time you will need to stay hidden. Practiced. The moment my enemies realize what I am doing, they will come for you even harder. You will be the proof that I can be broken. Then we make sure they can't find me, Mariam said. And we plan. And we prepare for whatever comes next. She smiled, though it felt shaky. I'm good at planning for the future. It's kind of my specialty. The next weeks were the strangest of Mariam's life. She lived in luxury under guard, continuing her classes online while Ha-joon conducted what he called strategic retreat. He came to her when he could, usually late at night, and told her about his progress in careful terms. This alliance shifted. That territory negotiated away. These protections put in place for people who'd worked for him. It was like watching someone dismantle a building from the inside while trying not to let it collapse on anyone. The Kim faction has agreed to take over port operations, he told her one night, 3 weeks into his campaign. They are shocked I am offering it freely, but they are not stupid enough to refuse. That eliminates one major source of conflict. And the Russians? Mariam asked. She'd learned the landscape of his world through these late-night conversations, learned to track the chess game he was playing. Trickier. They sense weakness and are pushing hard. I have had to make concessions I did not want to make. Had to give ground that may come back to haunt us. But you're still standing, Mariam observed. Still breathing. Still here. For now, Ha-joon agreed. The truly dangerous part comes next. I need to extract myself from family obligations. From expectations that have existed longer than I have been alive. He looked exhausted, she realized. More worn down than she'd ever seen him. My father is displeased. That is a significant understatement. Will he try to stop you? He already is. But I am his only son, and he does not wish to kill me if he can avoid it. That gives me leverage, though I hate using it. Ha-joon pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. Sometimes I wonder if this is madness. If I am destroying everything for a dream that cannot exist. Do you regret it? Mariam asked. Do you want to stop? Never, Ha-joon said fiercely. I regret many things, but choosing you is not one of them. Will never be one of them. The attack came on a Tuesday, 6 weeks into Ha-joon's careful dismantling of his empire. Mariam was reading in the library when the security alarms went off, harsh and immediate. She knew the drill by now, knew to stay exactly where she was while Ha-joon's remaining men secured the perimeter. But this time was different. This time the gunfire was closer, louder, more sustained. The door burst open and one of her guards, Min-joon, who'd been with Ha-joon for years, grabbed her arm. We need to move. Now. He was bleeding from his shoulder, she noticed with horror. The attack had breached their defenses. They ran through corridors Mariam had memorized over weeks of confinement, heading for the safe room Ha-joon had shown her on her first day. Behind them she could hear men shouting in multiple languages, could hear the ongoing firefight. Min-joon was on his phone, speaking rapidly in Korean, and she heard Ha-joon's name several times. Is he coming? Mariam asked as they reached the reinforced door of the safe room. He is already here, Min-joon said grimly. Fighting. This was a coordinated attack. They hit 3 of his locations simultaneously, including the one where he was meeting with his father. They wanted to ensure he could not reach you in time. The safe room was everything Ha-joon had promised. Reinforced walls, independent air supply, communications equipment, enough supplies to last for days. Min-joon sealed them inside and immediately started working the communications panel, trying to get a clear picture of what was happening outside. Mariam sat on the narrow cot and tried not to think about Ha-joon facing an army without his full resources, tried not to imagine all the ways this could end. The firefight lasted 47 minutes. Mariam knew because she watched every second tick by on the digital clock mounted on the wall. Then suddenly silence. Min-joon's phone rang and he answered it with visible tension. The conversation was brief, and when he hung up he looked at Mariam with an expression she couldn't read. "What?" she demanded. "What happened?" He is alive," Min-joon assured her quickly. "Wounded but alive. The attack has been repelled." "Then why do you look like that?" "Because the people who attacked us were not his enemies," Min-joon said carefully. "They were his father's men. This was not an attack from rivals. It was punishment from family." The implications of that hit Mariam like a physical blow. Ha-joon's own father had tried to kill him. Or kill her. Or both. Because Ha-joon had chosen to walk away from the family business. When they finally emerged from the safe room, the mansion looked like a war zone. Blood on the floors. Bullet holes in the walls. Bodies being carried out by grim-faced men. And in the center of it all, Ha-joon, sitting on a chair while someone stitched a gash on his arm, looking like he'd aged a decade in under an hour. He saw her and stood immediately, crossing the room despite the medic's protests. "You are safe," he said, and it wasn't a question. He could see she was unharmed. But he needed to say it anyway, needed to confirm it with his own eyes. "I am safe," Mariam confirmed. "Min-joon protected me. But Ha-joon, if your father is no longer my father," Ha-joon said flatly. "He made his choice when he sent men to kill the woman I love. I have made mine." He looked at her steadily. "I am done, Mariam. Done with this world, done with these people, done with trying to negotiate a peaceful exit. We leave tonight. Disappear. Start over somewhere they cannot find us." "Just like that?" Mariam asked. "You can just walk away?" "I can if I am willing to burn every bridge behind me," Ha-joon said. "And I am. My father wanted war. He will have it. But he will have it without me." His hands found hers, gripped tight. "I am asking you to run with me. To leave everything you know and build something new in a place where no one knows our names. I am asking you to choose a future that is uncertain and dangerous and probably full of challenges we cannot even imagine yet. As opposed to the certain and safe present we're currently enjoying?" Mariam asked, and despite everything she felt herself smile. "Ha-joon, I chose you when you were powerful and terrifying. I'm not going to unchoose you now that you're just terrifying." "You should," Ha-joon said seriously. "You should take the out I am offering. I can arrange for your safety, for your protection even after I am gone. You do not have to follow me into exile." "I know I don't have to," Mariam said. "I want to. You asked me once why I work so hard for a better future. This is my better future. Whatever we can build together." She stood on her toes and kissed him gently. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't brood yourself to death. Might as well be me." They left that night with false passports and enough money to start over. Ha-joon's remaining loyal men helped orchestrate their disappearance, creating a trail of false leads and dead ends that would take months to unravel. Mariam called her grandmother from a burner phone to say she was safe, that she loved her, that she would explain everything when she could. She didn't tell her where she was going. Didn't say when she might return. On a plane heading toward a small coastal town in Portugal where Ha-joon had bought a house under a name that wasn't his, Mariam looked at the man sleeping in the seat beside her. He'd fought his way out of an empire for her. Had chosen uncertainty over power, vulnerability over control. He wasn't the feared Mafia boss anymore. He was just Ha-joon, exhausted and wounded and committed to building something better. She thought about the coffee spill that had started all of this. The moment of disaster that had somehow turned into the best decision she'd ever made. Life was strange that way. The things that seemed like endings were often just beginnings in disguise. Ha-joon stirred in his sleep, his hand reaching for hers automatically. Mariam threaded their fingers together and looked out at the night sky beyond the window. They were heading toward a future neither of them could predict. Would probably face challenges they couldn't imagine. Would have to build a life from nothing in a place where everything was strange and new. She couldn't wait,